So we are right at the top of the hour and we will get started. So welcome to the drop-in live Q&A session for vendor setup and maintenance process, where you can ask questions related to vendor ads, vendor changes, vendor banking, fraud, portals, and more. Now, some housekeeping items before we get started. This session is being recorded. We will send you a link to the recording within 3 days. Feel free to submit your questions anytime. Type your questions in the question section. And if you want to respond to questions, type A, then your answer. This will be an interactive webinar, meaning you can unmute yourself when I call on you to further clarify a question or to respond to a question. If we don't get to all of your questions during the Q&A session, additional questions can be asked via email. Also, don't forget to download the handout, a PDF brochure. For those of you that are new here, I first want to introduce myself. I am Debra Richardson, and you may have heard of me by my saying, putting the AP in happy. As a previous AP senior manager, managing a team of 17, processing over 2,000 requests per month, and as you can imagine, many vendor bank ads and changes, I now work with AP vendor teams that are still fully or partially manual to add authentication techniques, internal controls, and best practices. I have a site dedicated to the vendor setup and maintenance process where I have some free resources and tools, including a blog, podcast, and on-demand webinars, all known for providing actionable steps. In 2021, I will be offering Q&A sessions just like this one every Friday, along with deep dive focused training every Thursday with an end goal to be a business case or customized template that you can take and implement immediately. More to come on that. So I did ask for questions to be submitted early. You could have emailed them to info@debrarrichardson.com, or when you registered, there was a field where you could have added or typed in your questions to submit it that way. And I did get 3 questions, and so we'll go over those first. So the first question is, what is the best way to validate vendor bank details? And you know, I get this question all the time. The podcast and the blog posts that relate to vendor banking details, how to reduce fraud, how to collect them, how to validate them, are always my most populated or most listened to episodes or blog posts. And so in one form or another, I always say at least 3 things. One is when you collect your vendor banking details, if you're collecting them through email, and if you still have that manual process, don't worry, you're not alone. Lots of folks do. If you don't have a vendor self-registration portal where the vendors will submit their bank details and maintain them, then you're still collecting them on email. And so whether it's international or domestic, the first thing you want to do is collect them on a company branded ACH form or vendor banking form. And why do I say that? Because if you're not collecting them through a vendor self-registration portal, you're collecting them through email. And so you need to authenticate that you're actually getting them from the vendor. So you need to to collect them on that form. And on the form, you will include something or some information that will authenticate them, like what is your existing banking information. And don't let vendors tell you they don't know, because somebody knows where they deposited your last payment to them. So you may just not be talking to the right person. I also recommend you require the tax ID. Again, another way to authenticate the vendor. And then I also recommend that you include a remittance address on there, especially, for those folks that have PeopleSoft or Oracle, any ERP that can have multiple locations, multiple remit addresses for one vendor record, header level vendor record. And that way, you're updating the correct remit address or location. Now, the next thing is you need to verify that information at the vendor level and at the bank branch level. So let's take the bank branch level first. The bank branch level, you'll want to verify the routing number. And especially the routing number, because in the US, some banks have different routing numbers for wire payments versus ACH payments. And a lot of vendors don't know that, so you need to verify that first. Then you can, if it's international, you can verify the SWIFT and the BIC code as well. And another thing I'd like to say about the bank branch details is that, banks are always merging and acquiring each other. The last one was BB&T and SunTrust, and they made they merged. The new name is Truist, and so Truist has a different routing number. So if you have routing numbers in your vendor master file on vendor records that had SunTrust or BB&T, guess what? Eventually, you're going to get those notice of changes, and if you don't make that change, then you could get a NACHA fine. So definitely check the bank branch details, be it domestic or international. And then the second level, of course, is the vendor level, meaning the vendor ownership, the bank account ownership, whether that vendor's legal name matches that bank account holder name. And so there are multiple places you can get that. Early warning and GIAC if you have those US vendors, and those two resources are only for US banks because they use a database that US banks contribute to, and international banks don't do that. But there is another resource, NSKNOX, so it's nsknox.net. You can check them out. They actually rely on a pre-note process, so they can provide bank account ownership validation for both U.S. and international banks. So I hope that helped. What's the best way to validate vendor international vendor bank details, or really domestic and international is how I handle it. One is to collect the information on the branded ACH form so you can add authenticating data. The next is to verify vendor bank branch details. And then the second is, or the third is to verify vendor ownership details. All right, so, and I hope that answered the question. So let's go ahead and move to the second one. So how long should it take to set up a vendor? Wow. So this one, I actually tried to find what I used in the past, because I did try to figure that out when I was an AP senior manager, because again, we had 17 people processing 2,000 requests per month. And actually that did not include the increase in requests that we would see in November, December. So right after Thanksgiving, it was the real year-end push. And so all those invoices that had been sitting on desk all year round that didn't have vendor records yet, all those had to be set up as those invoices were coming in. And so with that increased volume, of course, I implemented some additional processes to get those requests completed in time. And so I had quotas, and what I did is to just take a look at, just take a look at like regular requests versus something that might take a bit longer. So international requests would take longer. Nonprofit requests would take longer as well. And so I settled on 25 to 30 minutes per request. And again, that includes getting the request, reviewing the document, doing the validations, because those are, single validations. So doing those, and then also doing the keystrokes and keying them into the accounting system or ERP. And so again, that's what we use, 25 to 30 minutes. You have to take into consideration if you've got some automated processes in there, like a vendor self registration portal that would do the validations for you, maybe even do the keying in for you, and all your team has to do would be the review and the approvals. So take into consideration where you have automations, but that 25 to 30 minutes is for a completely manual process, meaning we get it in, the team has to review it, do the validations, and then key it into the system. All right, so on that note, then the next question is, do you recommend vendor self-registration portals? And I would absolutely say yes. I know that there's a trending topics out there related to the fact that, we're moving the accounts payable work of, keying in the vendor's data and getting them ready to be paid, getting that vendor record set up, that we're moving that now to the vendors. And because you could have a vendor or the AR department of a vendor do business with multiple, buyers that have these self-registration portals set up, it's not unusual for an AR department to have, I don't know, 50, 60 different portals that they have to register in order to do business with their buyers. And so there's that trend out there that is saying we've shifted that vendor record or vendor master file work from the AP team to the AR team, and that's all we've really done. However, you do need to look at the point that one, we're all getting used to it. Everything that we do, especially this year for the pandemic, most of it has moved online, or there is online accessibility. I know with all my accounts, personally and professionally, so personally, my bank, my utilities, credit cards, shopping, everything is online, and it's moving that way. And I've got, multiple personal and professional different online registrations, logins, access that are all online, and that's just becoming the norm. So an AR team may have different portals that they have to register in. However, that's the trend of where we're going today. And it also is to their benefit, because if they have a vendor self-registration portal that they can go in and maintain their own information, let's say their banking, that means that they won't be susceptible to a business email compromise. So a fraudster will have less chance of getting their payment if they are the only ones that can log in, authenticate themselves, and change their banking. So I kind of choose to look at it on the other side, meaning I look at the benefits and the fact that more things are really becoming an online requirement. And that's just where we're moving. And I think the authentication of it is great. I also think that the efficiency that can be gained on the AP side is great as well, because now you don't have to do one by one validations that you normally would do if you're setting up a vendor manually. You can now have the portal do those validations. Now, every portal is different. So if you have a portal that is missing a validation, say an OFAC validation, or maybe they don't have the vendor bank ownership validations that you're looking for, you'll have to supplement that, and then you'll have to, by doing those validations manually. So you'll have to supplement it, do those validations manually, but you still have the advantage of not having to do whatever validations are included in the portal. It's also great because if you have approvals required based on the type of vendor or other categories, then you can set those up automatically within the vendor self-registration portal, and then reminders go out. Another great thing about them too is I've seen some clients will eliminate their or reduce costs to their help desk, because any vendor that is registered in the vendor self-registration portal, they need to be asking their questions or communicating through the portal. Many of the portals have notes and have a messaging system so that you can communicate directly with your vendor that has authenticated themselves by logging in. So you know you're talking to that vendor, communicate directly through the portal. And so again, I've seen some clients that when they set up the vendor self-registration portal and they require it of all their vendors, they really reduce their volume of phone calls and email requests coming to the help desk, because they push all of that to the portal. So yes, I do recommend vendor self-registration portals. And I do have a couple of webinars on my website that talk about the journey, because I did set one up for 140,000 active vendors across 5 different ERPs, and I talked about that journey. And then I also have another one where I talked about the lessons learned from that journey as well. So check out my website if you'd like to look at those webinars and other webinars as well. I do have one on collecting and validating vendor bank details that went along with question 1 as well. All right, so those were the submitted questions. And so now let's get to questions that anyone has on this call. Okay, so for new questions. All right, so it looks like I just have one so far. We have not done anything for 1099 NEC. Where should we start? Wow. So for those of you that are not aware, the 1099 NEC or 1099 non-employee compensation, that is a new form. Actually, it's not a new form. It was around back in when Thriller came out, 1982, 1983, but they retired the form, and so they retired the form and came out with the 1099 MISC or miscellaneous form that we're all used to using. And they just combined all the boxes on that form, where they're bringing it back because there have been so many complications after they moved the deadline date for what used to be box 7 on the 1099 MISC. And so there was a lot of confusion around that. And so they separated the 2 forms, and now what was box 7 for non-employee compensation on the 1099 MISC, it is now box 1 on the 1099 NEC. So when you talk about where we should start, it really depends. So I did write a blog post about the 1099 NEC and what teams may have to do. And if you go to my site, you can click on free resources, go to the blog, and just type in 1099 NEC. But basically, what I wrote about is that you need to, number one, verify whether or not you have that form embedded in your accounting system or ERP. And when I was a practitioner, we actually we had two different forms. We had the 1099 MISC, and then we had a substitute 1099 MISC that was not formatted like the normal 1099 MISC. So we had one in PeopleSoft that was formatted like the 1099 MISC, and then we had a substitute form in SAP. And so if you have those forms embedded, then those forms need to be updated. So you need to update the 1099 MISC in your system, and then you need to add the 1099 NEC in your system, or update your substitute form so that it separates out the 1099 MISC or the 1099 NEC. So that's the first thing I would recommend you do. The next thing is so that's configuration, and that's the first thing. The next thing I would do too is just to let your vendors know in advance, send a communication, because you don't want your vendors surprised, confused, calling you starting the first week in January because there's this new form out there. Also, let them know that they could possibly be getting 2 forms this year, right? Because if you had a vendor that had, non-employee compensation, that was box 7 of miscellaneous, or in the 1099 miscellaneous, and then they also had rent, you can, select multiple boxes and have them have box 7 and box 1 on the 1099 MISC. Well, you can't do that anymore because they're separated. Now they're going to get 2 forms. And so the vendors, you don't want to have them surprised. So you want to make sure that you send them a communication and let them know. If you print your 1099 forms, meaning you don't have them embedded, then you want to make sure you order the new 1099 MISC and the 1099 NEC. And of course, the 1099 MISC form had to be revised or reformatted because box 7 was removed. So you need to order 1099 MISC, 1099 NEC, and then you also just want to get training for your team. And I do recommend to have some frequently asked questions as a part of your desktop procedures, and include some questions and responses to that new form, because you're going to get a lot of calls starting Feb 1 after you send those out. So train your team on the forms, and also give them some information or cut and paste scripts that they can use when they respond to those increased calls that are going to start in February. So I do recommend that you go to my site, DebraRRichardson.com. You click on free resources, get to the blog, plug in the 1099 NEC form, and take a look at that blog. I also have a podcast, episode 60, that addresses it as well. And so that actually really was a good question. And also, I do have a 1099 compliance update course where you can learn more about the 1099 NEC changes, kind of see the 2 forms, 1099 MISC, 1099 NEC, see what changes there were. That is a paid course, but you'll find a link to that in the blog post as well. So I would check that out, and I would kind of do that sooner than later. We're in December. There may be other changes that you need to do in your accounting system or ERP. If you need to direct certain payments to specific boxes within your ERP in order to create the files that are necessary, or direct payments to the right category. So check that out as well. And then one thing I would recommend, especially if, especially since we're so late in the year, so close to when those forms need to go out. If you haven't done anything and you're just starting out, it might be a great time for you to outsource your 1099 process. And it can be a full management outsource, where all you have to do is give them a file, with that third-party provider a file, and they will do everything for you. Or maybe that is getting a program, a platform, so that all you have to do is upload a file, and it will include all the latest versions of the 1099 and 1042 forms. So this might be a good time and a good incentive to be approved by leadership, since this is an IRS mandated change. So if you couldn't get that software or management services for 1099s, 1042s approved in the past, then maybe this is a great time to get that approved, especially since the 1099 NEC is not included in the partner program, combined federal and state program for the IRS. All the states, you have to file those 1099 NECs separately with the states. Again, might be a great time, great incentive to get that management service for 1099s, 1042s, or platform or software approved for the 1099, 1042 process. So good luck with that. And let me see if there are, so I don't see any more questions coming in. I'll give it about another 30 seconds. And if I don't see any questions coming in, we'll go ahead and end it. So see, another 30 seconds. I don't see anybody typing anything. All right, so we're just going to go ahead. I will conclude this session by just talking about the vendor team training class. Now, this drop-in live Q&A session is actually part of my vendor team training class. Every Friday, every week, there will be a Q&A session. You can come in, you can drop in, ask your question, leave, drop in, stay, listen to other questions and responses. It'll be a 2-hour session where I will be on the line for 2 hours. You can drop in, come and go as you please during that 2-hour session. So you don't have to be on in the beginning. I will be on for the whole 2 hours. So that is what will be included in the vendor team training pass, along with Thursday live trainings on Thursdays. And if you head over to the link here, you can take a look at more information. Also, you can download the 2021 training schedule, so you can see that. Also included in the training pass are digital downloads, meaning the e-guide. You also get access to the toolkit, which has vendor setup forms, vendor communication templates, along with templates for desktop procedures. And this is for the vendor process team training pass is for the whole team. You can take advantage of one monthly rate, the whole team, and you can cancel that monthly plan anytime. I also do have an annual plan, which will save you 20% over the monthly plan. But through December 31st, 2021, 11:59 p.m., you can get early access, and that will give you 10% off the monthly rate for 6 months. And then it'll also give you 10% off if you choose the annual plan. It'll give you 10% off that plan as well. So if you're interested in it, take a look at that. Also on my site, I have some free resources, a free vendor validation reference list, a free desktop procedure template, a free W8 expiration date tracking form, that's in Excel. And then I also have free live and on-demand webinars. And again, look for your email. You'll see a link to the recording for this, and it will also be up on my site if you want to listen to it later. All right, well, thanks everyone for joining, and this webinar is now concluded.